The situation in Ukraine makes it clear that NATO countries must finally pay for their own defense. Germany currently pays just over 1% of its GDP. This has been going on for decades, and other leaders have talked about it but never done anything about it. There are no longer any free rides in NATO. American leaders like Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden have criticized European partners for not paying their fair share of defense costs. The US has always wanted NATO members to be more responsible with their defense spending. Trump has criticized rich European countries for not meeting the 2% GDP target. Because of this stance, some partners have sped up their investments in defense. The US still spends the most on NATO, giving 3.49% of its GDP and 16% of the shared budget. Together, Canada, its European partners, and the United States spend more than $430 billion, or 2.02% of the combined GDP. But Trump's policy is different from those of other US governments, which put the alliance's safety first. Europe now has to deal with Trump's America First foreign policy, which makes people in Europe question the US's pledge to NATO in the future. Trade wars, taxes, and NATO use with partners are all part of Trump's America First strategy, which is like a global game of Monopoly. He has talked with North Korean leaders more than once, and he has publicly criticized NATO many times while he was president and even after he left office. Trump often said that US support for NATO was unfair, saying that it was like an ATM for partners with more money. He was always saying that different NATO members had not paid their bills, saying that they owed the US a huge amount of money or that they owed NATO billions of dollars. If Trump turns his attention to fighting China in the Pacific, Europe might have to take care of its own defense and security without helping from the US. Trump is ready to put a pressure on ties with NATO. For example, he recently put a 25% tax on goods from Mexico and Canada and an extra 10% duty on goods from China. Trump went after European partners and Canada in particular for not meeting NATO's 2% GDP defense spending goal. He said that the US unfairly pays for its own defense while paying for the security of its wealthy allies. Trump said that NATO members owe the US a lot of money for defense from the past, but no country is known to owe money. It's not like a club where you have to pay dues every year, and governments promise to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. But not all of them have reached that goal. Trump said that Germany only spends 1% of its money on defense, while the US spends 4.2%. Trump said that NATO countries agreed to spend $40 billion more on defense, but the real amount that was added was only $35 billion. 23 NATO countries, like France, Germany, Poland, and the UK, are on track to meet or beat the 2% goal by 2024. Last year, only 3 countries met the goal, so this is a big gain. Now the question is how strong would be a NATO in Europe without the US? If the US isn't there, can Europe stand up to Russia? The NATO countries in Europe have some of the world's best defense technology, but Russia's nuclear weapons means that no one will be pushing or shoving anytime soon. Europe has stepped up its efforts to improve its defense by working together more on projects like PESCO, ongoing organized cooperation, and the European Defence Fund, EDF. European countries have greatly increased their defense spending to line with NATO goals and move forward EU-specific projects. The European Defence Agency, EDA, is putting money into shared projects and tools to make Europe more ready for operations and make sure it can act on its own when it needs to. Trump, on the other hand, says this isn't enough and wants bigger budgets, better systems, and more safety measures. NATO thinks this is too much, and later says its efforts are the only reason it is still around. In response to its high defense spending, the US expects its NATO partners to meet its level of investment. Europe is threatened by many complicated things, such as terrorism, cyber attacks, rising prices, energy issues, and problems with trade. These problems have gotten worse because of things happening around the world, like the COVID-19 outbreak, more and worse weather, migration, and the war in Ukraine.